In 1990, a solo pilot vanished in a violent Midwestern thunderstorm. No wreckage, no body. 25 years later, the same aircraft descends from the sky and crashes into a field with no one inside. The storm rolled in fast over the Kansas plains, a thick wall of steel-gray cloud stretching from horizon to horizon. It was June 12, 1990, and veteran pilot Hal Conway was running late. He'd made this exact flight dozens of times, Wichita to Salina, a simple hop, barely an hour, but today, the sky had a mind of its own. Still, Hal wasn't the type to be spooked by thunderstorms. He'd flown through worse in his 22 years, behind the yoke of his 1978 Beechcraft Bonanza. At 4:42 p.m., Hal's plane lifted off from Wichita's small regional airport. Tower reports noted light turbulence and a fast-moving storm system drifting north, but no severe advisories had been issued yet. Onboard, Hal adjusted the dials, made his initial radio check-ins, and banked northwest. The plan was simple: stay low, skirt the storm's edge, and make Salina before the rain swallowed the entire corridor. But 23 minutes into the flight, everything changed. At 5:05 p.m., Hal radioed a quick update to Salina Tower. His voice was clear, calm. Just a little bumpy up here, but still visual. It was the last transmission anyone would ever hear from him. 10 minutes later, radar lost him. The controllers called, recalled, pinged his transponder. Nothing. 1 second, the little green blip was there. The next, it was gone just as the storm reached its fiercest intensity. Rescue teams were scrambled. The area between Wichita and Salina was relatively open farmland, dotted with grain silos and low-rise barns. Perfect visibility when not buried beneath angry clouds. Still, ground teams searched for nearly 6 days straight. Helicopters circled endlessly. Civil Air Patrol volunteers combed cornfields and back roads, but they found nothing. Not a single scrap of fuselage. No heat signatures, no parachute, no wreckage, no Hal. His family, understandably, was crushed. Hal had married young and built a quiet life in rural Kansas with his wife Annie. They'd never had kids. His plane was his passion. Annie, devastated and disbelieving, kept insisting he wouldn't have gone down like that. "He's too careful," she told reporters. If Hal went down, someone would have found something. A week later, the search was called off. The weather had cleared, but the mystery had only deepened. A rumor began to circulate in Wichita's small aviation community. Someone had picked up faint static from Hal's emergency frequency 2 days after the disappearance. Unconfirmed, of course, and mostly dismissed. But it was enough to haunt Annie, who began keeping a tape recorder by the police scanner in her den just in case. By July, the FAA issued a quiet statement listing Hal Conway's plane as missing, presumed destroyed due to weather. The insurance company paid out reluctantly. The radio tower logs were archived. His hangar was cleared. His name added to a growing list of pilots lost in adverse weather over the Great Plains. But unlike most of those cases, this one never had a body or a plane. And that kept Annie up at night. Across Kansas, old-timers still shook their heads whenever the 1990 storm came up. "Just swallowed that plane whole," they'd say. Right off the map. Some joked that the clouds over Kansas had a hunger that year. Others, the more superstitious, said that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the weather that took him. 25 years passed, until one morning in July 2015, a retired farmer named Howard Bristow walked into the Junction City Sheriff's Office and said the words that would reignite the entire mystery. "I think a plane crashed in my field last night." Deputies followed Howard back to his property, a flat stretch of overgrown farmland nestled between two tree-lined creeks. And there it was, resting strangely upright in the middle of a dry cornfield, as if placed there deliberately. A silver Beechcraft Bonanza tail number N47 Tauthainum, the same plane that had vanished without a trace in 1990. The sight of the plane stunned everyone. Though rusted in some spots, its body looked surprisingly intact. No evidence of impact. No signs of a violent crash. The nose gear had buckled slightly, leaving a shallow furrow in the soil, but the surrounding cornfield remained largely undisturbed. No tree branches broken, no scorch marks, no debris scattered beyond a few feet of the fuselage. It was as if the aircraft had been lowered gently from the sky. Sheriff Colton Graves had been in the department long enough to recognize a story when it landed literally in his jurisdiction. He ordered the area cordoned off, called in the FAA, and placed a temporary no-fly zone over the field. The plane's serial number was checked twice. No doubt it matched the record for Hal Conway's aircraft presumed lost in June 1990. And yet there it was, like a ghost out of time. Deputies approached the craft cautiously. The cockpit windows were streaked with dust, but unbroken. Peering inside, they expected a skeleton, a rotten seat cushion, something. But what they found was more unsettling. The cockpit was clean. Too clean. The leather on the seats showed minimal wear. The gauges looked like they hadn't aged a day. A pair of aviator sunglasses still sat neatly folded on the dash. On the floor beneath the pilot's seat was an open map, its edges curled only slightly. No blood, no sign of a struggle, but no pilot either. Most chillingly, the key was still in the ignition. The FAA team arrived within hours, escorted by state troopers. They began photographing every inch, dusting for prints, and inspecting the fuel tank, which was still about 1/3 full. The investigators couldn't believe it. Even the oil hadn't thickened like it should have, if the craft had been idle for 25 years. And then they found the flight log tucked into the seatback pouch. The last entry read, June 12, 1990, departed Wichita, 4:42 p.m. Storm front approaching. Holding at 5,000 ∗. That was it. There were no additions. No later entries. No sign of any mechanical failures noted. Just a brief, mundane log entry that now stood as the final written record of Hal Conway's last known actions. Sheriff Graves personally drove to Annie Conway's home later that day. She was now in her early 70s, living alone in a modest brick house on the edge of Salina. She opened the door and a floral robe blinked hard at the sheriff and immediately knew. "You found it," she whispered. He nodded solemnly. "It's your husband's plane, Annie. Looks like it came back." She sat down slowly on the front steps, hands trembling in her lap. For a moment she said nothing, just stared out across her patchy front lawn as if trying to comprehend the sheer impossibility of it all. Then quietly, "Is he inside?" "No, ma'am, no one was." "Was it damaged?" "No crash marks. It looks almost brand new." Annie's lips parted slightly. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "That's not possible," she said, and not as a question. "I know," the sheriff replied. Word spread fast. By the next morning, local news vans had parked near the field, and footage of the Beechcraft was making rounds on social media. Aviation forums lit up with speculation. Some blamed a military cover-up. Others floated the idea of time slips or rogue CIA programs. A few referenced the Bermuda Triangle, only this was in the middle of Kansas. But the mystery deepened when a mechanic from the FAA team, while examining the plane's onboard instruments, found a very faint, static-laced radio signal stored in the emergency beacon's buffer. The audio was short, just 8 seconds. A man's voice, grainy, almost swallowed by static. "Mayday. Visibility gone. Strange lights. Not alone." Then silence. The timestamp encoded in the file, June 12, 1990, 5:08 p.m. 3 minutes after Hal's final tower transmission. It had been stored for decades in the aircraft's emergency locator transmitter ELT undetected due to a power fault. Only when the beacon was reactivated did the old signal re-emerge as if waking from sleep. The FAA ran the voice through voice-matching software. It aligned with Hal's pilot license recordings. 98% match, so the world now knew Hal had seen something in the storm. Something that made him send a desperate cryptic distress call. Something he thought was alive, and then he was gone. The plane sat under guarded tarp for weeks as scientists and specialists picked it apart. No one could explain how it had avoided detection for 25 years. No missing persons tied to its appearance, no alternate sightings, no credible reports from nearby residents who had seen it land. Then, late one night, a security guard stationed near the aircraft radioed dispatch. "I think someone's walking around inside the plane," he whispered, voice taut with panic. But when backup arrived minutes later, the plane was empty just as before. Sheriff Colton Graves didn't sleep much that night. He kept replaying the guard's call in his head, trying to rationalize it. A trick of light. Shadows moving with the wind. Perhaps the young deputy had nodded off and dreamed it. But when the footage from the motion-activated camera was reviewed the next morning, that theory vanished like vapor. The grainy black-and-white clip showed the plane sitting silently under a large canvas tarp, moonlight filtering through a crack in the clouds. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the camera caught movement. First, a flicker inside the cockpit. A dim light blinked just once. Then, in the back left passenger window, the unmistakable outline of a figure. Human. Male. Sitting motionless. Staring out. The figure vanished in the next frame. The FAA team was called in again, accompanied now by 2 members from Homeland Security. The guard who had reported the sighting refused to return to the site, requesting reassignment. "Something's not right with that plane," he muttered, eyes sunken and darting. "It feels like it brought something with it." In town, the theories multiplied. Some believed Hal Conway had found a way back, somehow displaced in time or space. Others said the plane had never left, only hidden. A few whispered about alien abduction. Fringe groups began camping outside the cornfield, waving banners reading, "He flew through the veil and opened the sky again." Reporters tried to reach Annie Conway, but she stayed silent. Behind closed blinds, she replayed Hal's old voicemail tapes from decades ago. His laugh still echoed faintly in their home. She kept his flight jacket hanging by the door. For her, the past had never left until now, when it crashed back into her world with impossible force. A week later, a deeper investigation was launched. Scientists from NASA's Ames Research Center arrived discreetly citing classified electromagnetic anomalies. Along with them came Dr. Maris Fenwick, a physicist with a background in exotic matter and temporal theory. Her presence raised eyebrows. She began by scanning the interior of the plane with high-resolution magnetometers. The readings were erratic. A faint electromagnetic field pulsed beneath the cockpit controls, oscillating almost rhythmic. It was unlike any naturally occurring signal. Then, beneath the co-pilot's seat, Dr. Fenwick found something no one had expected, a scorched metal object round about the size of a baseball, lodged between the seat rail and the floor. It hummed faintly. The moment she touched it, the humming ceased. The FAA team sealed off the plane. The object was removed for analysis and flown to an undisclosed lab. All personnel were ordered to sign NDAs. Graves, sensing the narrative slipping from his hands, pushed for more transparency, but Homeland Security was now in charge. Still whispers spread. Some technicians said the object appeared to be layered with alloys not found in any Earth-based registry. Others claimed it projected heat signatures inconsistent with its surroundings, as if it had been somewhere colder. Much colder. Dr. Fenwick remained tight-lipped. But one night, over instant coffee in the back of the sheriff's office, she spoke candidly to Graves. "I don't think he crashed back," she said. "I think the plane came home without him." Graves furrowed his brow. You think Hal's still out there? She looked away. I think something came back in his place. The sheriff didn't press her. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Days later, a second incident rocked the town. A farmer from just outside Salina, George Pruitt, called in after discovering strange indentations in his field. Not crop circles, not tire tracks. Deep impressions in the soil spaced like enormous footsteps. They led straight toward the road and stopped. Pruitt's wife, who had been tending the back garden that morning, reported hearing a high-pitched humming just before the discovery. It was like someone had pressed a tuning fork against the air, she said. It made my teeth hurt. More teams arrived. The impressions were documented soil samples taken. No conclusions were shared with the public. But the event stirred something long buried. An old man named Lester Halbrook came forward with a dusty cassette recording from 1990. He'd been working as a civilian radar technician at the Salina airport during Hal Conway's final flight. According to his log, something strange had happened that night. There was a blip on the radar, he said. It appeared out of nowhere right beside Hal's plane. Stayed with him for almost 2 minutes, then both vanished. He had been told to delete the entry. Now he played the tape. A hiss of static, then a calm voice. 9-2 Tango, confirm your heading. Then Hal's voice, audible, clear. There's something above me. Lights. Too fast. Not responding. Silence. Then a burst of static, and one last message so faint it had gone unnoticed for years. It's opening. That word hung heavy in the room. Opening what? No one could say. Dr. Fenwick asked for the recording to be handed over. Graves kept a copy for himself. Later that night, he sat in his truck listening again and again to the final seconds. The tone in Hal's voice wasn't just fear, it was awe, as if he had seen something beautiful, terrible, and then vanished into it. The days following the release of the recording were tense. News hadn't broken to the national media yet. The agencies involved wanted it that way. But in Salina, Kansas, the town's pulse had changed. Sheriff Graves began waking to anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Some were just static. Others mumbled voices too garbled to trace. One message repeated the same 6 words over and over. He's flying. He's still flying. He's... Click. He tried not to mention it to his wife, but she noticed how he flinched every time the phone rang. Meanwhile, Dr. Maris Fenwick's team examined the metal sphere retrieved from Hal Conway's cockpit. It was stored in a vacuum-sealed chamber at Fort Detrick. The object behaved like nothing Earth-engineered. When exposed to standard wavelengths of light, it refracted them strangely, casting shadows where there shouldn't be any. More disturbing, the sphere emitted faint bursts of gamma radiation in pulses. Not enough to harm, but consistent. Rhythmic, as if it were transmitting. Then, on a Thursday morning, power flickered across the entire town for exactly 1.3 seconds. In that moment, every digital clock in Salina reset to 12:14. Every single one. Security systems tripped, thermostats reset, and even battery-operated watches glitched. Local techs chalked it up to an electrical substation surge. But for those who knew better, 12:14 was the exact minute Hal's voice disappeared from the radar recording. Dr. Fenwick and Graves met that evening. She looked pale, her eyes sleepless. I believe the object is a data capsule, she said. A kind of black box, but not from this world. I believe Hal's consciousness, or a piece of it, may have been recorded. Maybe even preserved. Graves didn't understand. You think he's in that thing? She hesitated. Not physically, but something of him. Memory, thought, a fragment. He looked out the window, and it came back home. The sheriff had seen grief. He had buried people who didn't deserve to die and comforted families who never found remains. But this was different. This was like grieving the idea of a man. An echo of a life, not a body. 2 days later, it got worse. A family driving north along Route 56 called 911 in a panic. They claimed they had seen a plane gliding low across the tree line near an abandoned airstrip. It was real low, the father said. But there was no engine noise. It was gliding. Like it was watching us. The report was dismissed until a traffic camera 15 miles away captured a grainy frame. A shadowy object moved across the sky at a low altitude. No lights. No sound. Resembling Hal's vintage Beechcraft Bonanza. But the tail number, obscured. Dr. Fenwick asked to examine the motion data and found something stranger. The object's movement wasn't linear, it jittered. Frame by frame, its position changed, as if it skipped through space rather than flew. Her notes used terms like quantum drift and temporal discontinuity. Meanwhile, the town began to unravel. 2 children at Roosevelt Elementary claimed to have seen a pilot man standing outside their bedroom windows. A retired air traffic controller, now suffering from dementia, woke in the middle of the night screaming coordinates from Hal's original flight plan. Worst of all, Annie Conway, Hal's wife, disappeared. She left no note, no phone call, no sign of struggle. Her car remained parked in the driveway. Her phone was found on the kitchen counter, still charging, but the front door, wide open. Graves organized a search party. The town rallied around the effort. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't the kind of disappearance that ended with a body in the woods. This felt like something else. A week passed. Then, at 3:33 a.m., the airport tower received a call on a now decommissioned frequency. No one should have been able to transmit on it. The message lasted 6 seconds. "Tell Annie, the sky is soft now." Silence. Radar confirmed nothing in the area at the time. But when Graves returned to the field where Hal's plane had landed, weeks before, something had changed. The grass surrounding the tarp had withered in a perfect circle, dead, ash gray. And the circle was growing. Dr. Fenwick took samples. The soil showed signs of rapid molecular breakdown, almost as if the grass had aged 500 years overnight. Whatever force had brought the plane back wasn't done. In his own home, Graves dusted off a box from the attic. Inside were photos from his own training as a pilot decades earlier. One in particular stood out, taken at a county air show in 1988, and standing in the distant background, fuzzy, distorted, barely visible, was a man in a pilot's jacket. One hand held a logbook. The other pointed skyward. It was Hal Conway, except Hal had already disappeared by then. Graves didn't sleep that night. The photograph of Hal, blurred in the background of that 1988 air show image, stayed propped against Sheriff Graves's desk lamp. He didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. It felt like a secret too heavy for most. Instead, he turned to the one person who might understand, Joel Marwick, a retired pilot turned amateur ufologist, who once served with Hal Conway in the Air National Guard. Graves found Joel living alone on the outskirts of Salina in a cluttered trailer full of shortwave radios and salvaged aviation parts. He hadn't flown in decades, but his memory was sharp. When Graves showed him the photo, Joel didn't blink. "I saw him once," Joel said quietly. "About 12 years ago, at a refueling station in Abilene, just standing there. Didn't say anything, but I swear it was Hal." "You never reported it." "Would you?" Joel scoffed. "They'd cart me off." Graves leaned forward. "You think he's alive?" Joel tapped the edge of the photo. "No, but something of him is." That same evening, news broke on the local station. A single-prop plane had crashed outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. The tail number matched Hal Conway's aircraft, the same plane that had been found weeks ago in a Kansas field. Except this one was intact, and it had no pilot. Worse, there was no cockpit damage. No sign of anyone ever being inside. The FAA scrambled to make sense of it. Was it a hoax, a copycat? The official report labeled it a misidentification incident. But photos leaked online showed a disturbing detail: the aircraft had corrosion around the seams, decades of wear, inconsistent with a craft that had landed only days prior. Graves made the drive to Tulsa in silence. At the crash site, cordoned off and crawling with federal agents, he wasn't allowed past the perimeter. But he recognized one of the NTSB investigators, an old contact from an earlier case. The man met him behind the hangar at dusk, lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "You didn't hear this from me," the agent whispered. "But we found fingerprints inside. One set. On the throttle. Hal's." The agent nodded once. "But that's not the worst part." "What is?" "There were no boot prints on the floor. None. Not a single trace of anyone climbing in or out." Back in Salina, Dr. Fenwick continued her research into the sphere. Her breakthrough came from analyzing the gamma pulse intervals. When slowed dramatically and converted to spectrogram form, the pulses formed patterns. Words. In English. And though fragmented, one clear sentence emerged. "Loop remains unbroken. Time folds back." It didn't make sense. But when Graves showed her the airshow photograph, her expression changed. She stared at the man in the background for a full minute. This might confirm it?" "Confirm what?" "That time didn't just pass for Hal. It bent. Maybe snapped." She explained it like this. If Hal had been taken or transposed during the thunderstorm in 1990, he may not have traveled through space. He may have been displaced in time itself, dropped back in fragments, glimpses, like static between broadcast channels. "The plane that landed wasn't the same one that crashed," she said. "They are two instances of the same object, like twins." "No," she said, "like echoes." A few days later, something happened that couldn't be dismissed. A journalist named Eli Brower from a Wichita newspaper published a piece titled "The Pilot Who Won't Die." In it, he mentioned receiving dozens of tips from readers across Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma, all claiming to have seen a man in an old pilot's jacket wandering roadsides, sitting silently on bus benches, or staring skyward on empty football fields. Each sighting shared one detail: the man wore a patch reading Hal over his heart. Brower included a photograph one reader had snapped from a distance. Though low resolution, the man's face was unmistakable. It was Hal. Graves confronted Brower at a diner 2 towns over. "Where was this taken?" Brower showed him the exact spot outside a shuttered drive-in movie theater. But when they arrived, the benches were empty, the air still. Only a faint burnt odor lingered, ozone sharp and unnatural. And beneath one bench in the dirt, a single boot print remained. Old, but fresh enough. Graves crouched to examine it. There was something inside the indentation, a single pilot's pin dulled with age. He picked it up, holding it to the sky. The wind changed. That night, Dr. Fenwick played the sphere's pulse file again. But this time, a second voice bled through, unmistakably Hal's. "I see you. You don't see me. Time loops. Too late to land." And then static. The message repeated, Hal's voice over and over, drifting in like radio from a storm far away. Back at the sheriff's office, Graves began writing a letter. Not to Hal, but to Annie Conway, Hal's missing wife. He didn't know where to send it. Didn't even know if she was alive. But something told him she was out there, waiting, somewhere, where the sky never closed, where time still spun. The next morning, Sheriff Graves drove to the last place Hal had been seen before the crash, the Kansas airfield, where the plane had supposedly touched down a few weeks prior. The place was quiet now. Only a single hangar still operated, and the tarmac was cracked and littered with weeds. The scent of jet fuel lingered like a ghost of the past. He approached the hangar attendant, a young man in his 20s named Drew, who had been working the night shift when the plane appeared. Drew looked pale even now, like he hadn't slept since. "I told the feds everything," he muttered when Graves introduced himself. "They said not to talk to anyone else." "I'm not here to make trouble," Graves said gently. "I just need to understand what happened." Off the record, Drew hesitated, then glanced around before leading Graves inside the hangar. Once they were behind the closed metal doors, he finally spoke. "It was around 2 a.m., Drew said. I was cleaning the office windows when I heard this whining sound, like metal screaming, but soft, like from far away. Then out of nowhere the lights dimmed, and there it was, on the runway. You saw it land. No, that's just it. 1 second it wasn't there, and the next it was. No lights, no sound, no descent. Just blink, like it phased into reality. Graves felt a chill crawl up his spine. Was anyone inside? Drew shook his head. I checked. I swear I checked. The cabin was empty. No fuel smell. The engine was cold. Cold, Graves asked, surprised. Yeah, like it hadn't flown in days. That confirmed it. Whatever that plane was, it hadn't landed by conventional means. Later that evening, Graves sat in his truck outside the now-abandoned Conway family farmhouse. The windows were boarded and the porch sagged. No one had lived here since 1991 after Annie's disappearance, but something compelled him to return. He walked the perimeter, slowly, boots crunching on dry leaves. At the back of the house, near the collapsed barn, he spotted something unusual, an old telephone pole leaning to one side. Its wires had long been cut, but someone had stapled a fresh laminated sign to the wood. It read, "He's trying to call." There was no signature, but duct-taped below it was a burned fragment of what looked like a photograph. Graves peeled it loose and held it to the fading light. It was a Polaroid. A woman's face, partly charred, her smile frozen. Annie. Back at the station, Graves laid out the evidence like a madman's puzzle. Hal's voice on the pulse file, the identical aircrafts, the unexplained footprint, and now this, the message on the pole, and a ruined photo from nowhere. It all pointed to one impossible conclusion. Hal was alive, or had been. But when was another matter? Dr. Fenwick returned with a theory she barely believed herself. There's a concept in quantum theory, she explained, called superposition. It says a particle can exist in multiple states at once until observed. What if people, or even time itself, could act the same? You're saying Hal could exist in more than one time? Yes. And the act of observation, someone seeing him, hearing him, calling him, might lock him back into place. Like collapsing the wave function. Graves blinked. So the more we dig, the closer he gets to reappearing. Fenwick nodded. Or disappearing entirely. Meanwhile, reports flooded in across the region. Sightings of a glowing object moving erratically through the clouds. Strange power outages. Radios flickering to life on old dead frequencies. Always broadcasting the same broken line. Still in the storm. Then came the call. Not to Graves. To 911. The dispatcher's transcript read, "Caller. You have to help me. I don't know where I am. I see lights, but nothing moves. I think I'm stuck in a loop. I hear Annie. She's calling from the barn. But the barn's on fire. Dispatcher, sir, can you tell me your name?" Caller Hal. I'm Hal Conway. It's 1990 and I'm flying into the storm. Dispatcher, sir, it's 2015. Line clicks. Silence. The number traced back to Hal's old flight radio transceiver, unregistered, inactive for decades. And yet the voice matched. Audio experts confirmed it, pitch, inflection, breath patterns. It was him. That same night, an experimental weather balloon flying over northern Kansas recorded a massive localized electromagnetic pulse. Within it, embedded in the data, was a signature frequency matching that of Hal's original plane transponder. Time wasn't just unraveling, it was nodding. The sheriff made a decision. He would return to the site of the original disappearance, the storm corridor along Route 22 near the Twin Buttes where Hal had vanished. He packed nothing but a flashlight, his revolver, and the photo of Annie. He left the radio on tune to static. At 3:09 a.m., the exact time Hal's plane went dark in 1990, Graves stood in the middle of the road beneath rolling thunderheads. The air trembled, lightning flickered, then everything fell silent. The static cut, and a single voice came through. "She's still here." The voice faded, but the air still felt charged. Sheriff Graves stood motionless in the dark, every instinct screaming at him to run, but curiosity rooted him in place. She's still here. The words echoed in his mind, not just spoken but embedded as if the voice hadn't entered through his ears, but directly into his memory. The storm that loomed above the buttes didn't move on. It sat hung unnaturally still. The clouds churned without drifting, a slow, circular dance that seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat. Graves took a hesitant step forward, his boots crunching over the gravel shoulder of Route 22. The last time anyone had seen Hal Conway alive was just beyond this curve. He descended into the slight valley where the tree line closed in around the road, and shadows pooled like oil slicks. He stopped by the wooden mile marker that had stood since the 60s, its paint nearly faded, and then a glint of silver in the ditch. Graves knelt, brushing away weeds and dead leaves. It was a piece of a radio panel. A switch plate battered and cracked with lettering nearly rubbed off. He rubbed the grime away with his thumb. COM 1 TWR MCI, Kansas City Tower. It couldn't be a coincidence. He radioed in to Fenwick, who had stayed behind at the county station to monitor signal fluctuations. "I found something," he said. "From Hal's radio, I think. Near mile marker 33. Fenwick's voice came through tense. "Sheriff, we're picking up something new. Multiple bursts on the transponder band. Narrow range centered on 122,000 PTH. Do you have your scanner?" He did. Graves clipped the handheld radio off his belt and turned the dial manually. The moment he hit 122.8, his skin prickled. A voice broke in static-laced but unmistakably human. "Can't land. Clouds keep folding. Annie says don't follow the fire." He dropped the scanner. The voice was Hal's, and it sounded recent, urgent. Graves stared at the trees. The underbrush had parted oddly, as though something large had recently passed through, though no tire tracks or footprints marked the dirt. He stepped off the road and followed the indentation flashlight beam cutting through the black. After 20 minutes of slow hiking through the bramble, he came to a clearing. In the center stood the burnt shell of what once was a cabin. The walls were charred black, the roof caved in. But even in its ruin, it was familiar. Graves recognized it from old aerial photos. This was the cabin Hal and Annie had rented for a brief honeymoon in 1984, years before the crash. But it had been destroyed in a fire in 1991. So why was it still here? He approached the doorway, stepping over a scorched beam. Inside, it smelled of ash and something sweet like burning plastic. On the floor sat a cassette recorder, melted and half fused to the wood, but the reel inside still spun slowly, impossibly. He bent down. Click. The tape began to play. A woman's voice, Annie's. "I told him not to fly. I told him the sky wasn't right." But he didn't listen. Now time doesn't work the same. He hears me because I'm part of the loop. He sees me in places I never was, and if you're hearing this, you're already part of it. The tape hissed, stopped. Graves stumbled back cold with fear. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a closed system, a tangle of time folding back in on itself. Suddenly light. A harsh beam illuminated him from above. He looked up. No helicopter, no aircraft. Just a circle of light, dead, silent, motionless, and then just as quickly gone. He spun around and saw the most horrifying thing he'd seen yet. A figure standing at the edge of the woods. Not Hal, not Annie. It looked like a man, but too tall, too thin. Its limbs impossibly long, its head featureless. But in its hand, it held something, a flight helmet. Hal's. Graves drew his revolver, trembling. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head slowly, and without a sound, stepped backward into the shadows. Gone. The light around him changed. No longer night. It was early morning. Birds chirped. The cabin was gone. He was back on the road, Graves turned in place, confused. Had he hallucinated the whole thing? But in his hand, he was still holding the melted tape recorder. He staggered to his car, started the engine, and drove back to the station in silence. There, Fenwick was waiting wide-eyed. "You disappeared from the GPS for over 4 hours," she said. "But your call came in 5 minutes ago." She showed him the recording. "Sheriff Graves, this is Hal. I don't know how much longer I have. I'm stuck between a loop, between places. Annie's voice guides me, but something else is pulling me back. If you find the recorder, I left something else with it." Graves opened the tape deck again. Under the melted plastic wrapped in tin foil was a small metal tag, engraved with Conway H., USIF, 1997, pilot. It hadn't rusted. No one could explain it, but Graves knew Hal was out there. Not in the sky, not on the ground, somewhere in between. The metal tag sat under a glass dome in Sheriff Graves's office, inert and silent, but to him it pulsed with something unseen. It hadn't aged, hadn't corroded, and no one in the Air Force could explain why a pilot's ID tag from 1987 would turn up in an abandoned forest clearing, wrapped inside a melted tape recorder. 3 decades after the man disappeared, Graves barely slept that night. He stared at the ceiling fan as it spun the faint clicking like a ticking clock too far gone to reset. Hal's voice echoed in his mind, between places, and Annie's, "If you're hearing this, you're already part of it." The next morning, he returned to the sheriff's station with fresh resolve. He needed more than anecdote. He needed proof. He needed someone who understood the phenomenon that seemed to be unfolding around them. He contacted the National Weather Service, and then NORAD. He pulled FAA radar logs from 1990, back when Hal's plane went missing in the Thunderstorm. But he also filed a FOIA request for satellite imagery from the week before the crash and the week after. He wasn't looking for the plane. He was looking for an anomaly. 2 days later, a package arrived. Inside were grainy infrared satellite images from June 1990 over Kansas and parts of Nebraska. At first, they revealed only typical storm patterns, scattered fronts moving east. But on the night of June 12th, between 11:42 p.m. and 12:13 a.m., a disturbance appeared. It wasn't cloud-based, it was circular, geometrically perfect, 20 miles wide, hovering over uninhabited farmland and not moving with the wind. Graves blinked at the image. He laid it side by side with radar echoes taken from the Kansas City Tower that same night, strange returns that flashed and disappeared in 3 frames, all centered around Hal Conway's last known flight path. He needed to go back to the crash site. The field was cordoned off, now marked as a temporary FAA investigation zone. But Graves knew the farmer who owned the land, a reclusive man named Reuben Hawks. Reuben met him at the gate, chewing sunflower seeds and squinting against the morning sun. "You see the way that plane came down?" he asked. "Didn't so much crash as just settled. Not a single tree burned, no broken branches, and no one saw it come down. Except it's embedded 10 feet deep in the soil," Graves muttered. Reuben nodded grimly. "Like it dropped." Graves stepped past the gate. The plane was still there, untouched. No rot. No weathering. The fuselage was pristine aside from the broken front window where the pilot should have sat. He walked up the access ladder, past the nose cone, and entered the cockpit. Every light on the control panel was dead, except for one. The transponder light, 120 MHz, same as the broadcast from the forest clearing. He reached for the toggle, hesitated, and flipped it off. The moment he did, he heard something. Breathing, soft, slow. Right behind him. He turned sharply, but the cockpit was empty. Still, the breath persisted like the memory of sound. He fumbled with the handheld scanner, tuning again to the transponder frequency. "Not where I left. Sky's too red." "Annie, I followed it." More static, a tone. Then, "He's watching from the lightning." Don't let it storm again. Graves dropped the scanner. He stumbled out of the plane, heart racing. Back on the ground, Reuben stood stiffly by the fence. He pointed toward the western sky. Storm's building again. Same spot, same shape. Graves turned and froze. The clouds had begun to spiral, slow, intentional, like gears winding open. This wasn't weather. This was a pattern. Back at the sheriff's station, he pieced it together. The old tape, the call on the sheriff line, the radar logs, the infrared image, the pristine crash in 2015, the missing pilot, and now the repeat storm. It was happening again. He pulled the only file that still gave him chills, a rural report from 1982, 8 years before Hal disappeared. A man claimed to have seen a metal bird stuck in midair over the same farmland. Didn't fly, he'd written. It just sat. Thunder roared, but no rain came. Then the bird vanished, like a reel ran out. Graves picked up the tag from under the glass dome. Conway H. USAIFI. Mulimet Centernoditsepnen. Pilot. This wasn't the first loop, and it wouldn't be the last. He radioed Fenwick again. Scan 122.8. Tell me what you hear. Minutes later, her voice came back shaken. Sheriff. There's more now. More voices. Not just Hal. A dozen, maybe more. Each overlapping. Some laughing, some crying, some whispering coordinates. But one phrase came clear. Flight continues, but no pilot remains. Graves didn't sleep that night. The sky stayed lit, and the thunder, though distant, never stopped. The storm lingered. Day after day, the radar lit up with rotating echoes that should have meant tornadoes, but no funnel cloud ever touched down. No wind damaged crops. No lightning struck. Yet every evening around the same hour, 11:42 p.m. thunder would roll over that same patch of Kansas farmland, rattling windows in the sheriff's office. A low, rumbling growl that vibrated in the gut more than the ears. And it always ended the same way: silence. A precise, too clean cut to nothing. Sheriff Graves sat in the dark of his office, the blinds drawn against the dim orange glow of stormlight. He had the transponder frequency 122.8 MHz running through an old ham radio on his desk. Every night he recorded the signals, but on the 7th night something changed. There was no signal, just static. Then around 11:47 p.m. a new voice cut through. It wasn't supposed to land. Check Hangar 13. He sat up, eyes narrowing. Hangar 13. He hadn't thought about that in years. It was an abandoned Air Force storage facility north of town, disused since the late 80s. Graves remembered it being mentioned in one of the declassified files from the 1990 investigation. Supposedly, it was empty. But the phrase stuck with him. Wasn't supposed to land. Could the plane not have crashed by accident? Could it have returned? He drove out before sunrise. Hangar 13 stood in the middle of an overgrown tarmac, surrounded by rusted fencing and surveillance poles stripped of wires. The metal hangar doors were chained shut, but rusted through. He broke the lock with a crowbar and stepped inside. The air was cold. Dust danced in the first sliver of sunlight to breach the doorway. But beneath the dust, the space was clean, too clean, and in the center of the hangar, under a green tarp, was a shape he couldn't believe. A second plane, identical make and model to Hal Conway's, tail number 77121A. He stepped closer. The fuselage gleamed like it had just been polished. He climbed the ladder, hand trembling, as he gripped the side of the canopy. Inside empty, but the instruments were lit. Dim green glows and amber needles alive with impossible energy. And on the seat, a cassette recorder. He pressed play. Storm doesn't end here. Not even in death. The cockpit loops forever. The voice wasn't Hal's. It was Annie's, the same woman from the original tape. But she hadn't flown planes. She'd been a civilian controller, so how was she? A flash of light from outside. Graves turned. A dark figure stood by the edge of the hangar. silhouetted by dawn mist and lightning haze. "Sheriff," the figure called. It was Fenwick. He exhaled sharply. "You scared the hell out of me." "I followed your signal," she said, walking toward him. "And you're not going to believe what's just come through dispatch." He climbed down to meet her. "We got a call at 4:17 a.m., she said. "No ID, no trace. But the dispatcher swears it was a man. Said he was calling to report a mid-air stall." Graves frowned, and she swallowed. He gave his call sign, Ghostbird 71712. Graves blinked. "Hal's call sign?" "No, Sheriff," she said quietly. "That's the one the second plane is registered to. The one in the hangar. FAA tag confirms it was built in 2013. His blood ran cold. "That plane shouldn't exist," he muttered. She nodded. "Then how did a man in 1990 vanish and call us today from a plane built 2 decades later?" They stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, the sun began to break through the cloud cover, but the hangar remained shadowed, as if holding something in. Then the wind began to pick up. Low, circular. Graves turned toward the runway. A ripple shimmered over the tarmac. Not heat, not air. Like a mirage trying to become real. He motioned Fenwick back. "We need to go. Now." She didn't argue. As they drove away, both looked back once. The hangar shimmered, and the second plane was no longer there. Back at the office, Graves reviewed the flight logs from the FAA. Ghostbird 77121A had never been filed as active. It wasn't in any registry before this year, but someone or something had been flying it, and whatever flew it wasn't coming back the way it left. That night, the sheriff dreamed of the storm again, but this time he was inside the cockpit, flying blind, surrounded by stars, and in the co-pilot seat a figure without a face. It turned to him and whispered, "You land and the sky resets. You vanish and the storm grows." He woke in a cold sweat. Outside, the thunder had begun again. Same time, same rhythm. The loop wasn't broken. It had just begun. The thunder didn't stop for the next 3 nights. It came without clouds, now rolling across the town of Ashwood like a ghost train no one could see. Windows vibrated. Radios hissed. Dogs refused to bark. On the 4th night, it rained ash. Not soot, not pollen ash. Fine gray flecks that coated windshields and rooftops, and power lines soft as bone dust. The local weather station blamed a far-off wildfire, but Sheriff Graves knew better. It wasn't drifting in from anywhere. It was falling out of the sky. From something up there. Graves and Deputy Fenwick returned to Hangar 13 the following morning. The site had been quiet again. No mirage. No signs of entry. But the second plane was back exactly where it had been before. Covered, powered off, untouched, except for one change. The cassette recorder had a new tape inside, labeled in ballpoint ink flight deck, final cycle. Fenwick insisted they listen together. They brought the recorder back to the sheriff's office, locked the door, dimmed the lights, and hit play. A hiss. Then Hal Conway's voice, but not calm and steady like the original tapes. He was frantic, breathing hard. "I've circled for years. No night, no day. I see the ground sometimes, but it's not ours. The coordinates loop. They fold. Annie told me if I land, I break it, but if I don't, I become it. I thought I could hold on. Thought I could just keep flying until they noticed. But now the second cockpit's lit. There's someone else here." I didn't open the door. The tape went silent. Then the unmistakable sound of a cockpit door creaking open, followed by footsteps, and a voice low and rasping, impossibly familiar. "Sheriff Graves, you remember me." The recording stopped. Graves turned white. Fenwick leaned forward. "That voice, was it your brother?" Graves said nothing. 30 years earlier, his brother Travis Graves had also disappeared. On a solo night flight over Missouri, declared lost in a storm. His name was never released publicly. Not even within the department. a family secret buried in grief. But now Graves was certain. Whatever existed up there didn't kill pilots. It collected them. The sheriff ordered the hangar sealed, this time permanently. Cement poured. Surveillance rigged. FAA notices filed. But they both knew it wouldn't hold. 3 days later, the sheriff's office received a package. No sender, no return address. Inside, a single Polaroid. It showed the cockpit of Ghostbird 77121A. In the left seat, Hal Conway. Haggard, eyes sunk deep. In the right seat, Travis Graves, wearing the same jacket he'd vanished in, down to the aircav pin on his collar. Behind them, just outside the canopy, stars twisted like threads being pulled through fabric. On the back of the photo was a timestamp. Taken 2035. Fenwick dropped the photo. Graves stared at it, breathless. 2035 was 10 years in the future. He turned to his deputy. "Time's not moving the way we think." "No," she said. "And it's not just one plane." The radar had picked up something else. Another bogey. Same tail number, same altitude, same time of night. But this time, 2 planes in formation. The town started reporting strange dreams. Nightmares of being trapped in clouds that never cleared, of engines that wouldn't die, of sky that folded into mirrors. An air traffic controller in Omaha called Ashwood PD in a panic. A pilot was speaking on an abandoned emergency frequency 122.0 MHz. He claimed to be a passenger on his own flight, and the last thing he said before the line went dead: "Tell the ground. Tell them not to receive us." Then static. Graves submitted his resignation a week later. Left town, disappeared off-grid. Fenwick took his place, but quietly shuttered the aviation case files. The second plane. It vanished one last time, this time on camera. One moment it was there under the tarp. Then it shimmered, and it was gone. No heat, no sound, no wind. Just empty space and one scorched tape labeled, "Cycle complete." To this day, residents of Ashwood, Kansas still hear the thunder. Sometimes it comes with lights in the sky, sometimes with a flash of a tail number, but always at 11:42 p.m., and always when the wind smells like burnt ozone. No one flies over that stretch of sky anymore, and those who do never look down. Because some say that if you peer too long into that storm, you might see your own cockpit, empty, waiting